G'day everyone, welcome back to Frontlines and Faultlines with Mike Kelly. It's good to have you back with me, and you might recall we've been doing a deep dive on the history of Iran, basically trying to set the scene for all the dynamics and get a better understanding of what's going on in contemporary Iran and its role and the impacts of its role in the Middle East. And it's very important to understand Iran, really, to have that deep historical context. So we now move in this week to have a chat about the period that begins with the Seljuqs and the Mongol invasion of Iran. This was a very interesting period. The Seljuqs expanded right across a very, very large region of the Middle East and Central Asia. And they were very, basically, they had a real empathy for Persian culture, a very adoptive of Persian cultural background and heritage, and so they promoted it quite vigorously right across the regions that they then managed to dominate. So all of the literature and art of that period and the philosophy reflected that sort of Persian heritage. And also you saw a further advancement in the architecture that is demonstrated across Iran, building on what would continue to be a great heritage for Iran, and a lot of World Heritage sites emerging during these wonderful periods of architectural excellence and development. And importantly too, the Seljuqs made some really great advances in systems of government and how they administered all the various regions. And that system and the way that they managed to improve the administration of each province, overcoming tyrannies of distance and the like, was going to be carried through on many of the subsequent empires that we'll be discussing. So what did the Seljuq Empire look like? Boundaries were not precise historically. They were quite fluid, but this gives you a bit of an idea of the peak of the Seljuq reach right across the region, and the period during which they really dominated between 909 and 1171 AD. And this is a really critical period because they're really butting heads with the Byzantine Empire during this period, and you've got the Crusades going on. So where did they come from? Well, basically they were a Turkic group, and you can see a lot of the dynamics in Iran revolve around that relationship with Turkic peoples and the Ottoman Empire later on. So really the crossover of ethnic and genetic heritage is quite mixed, bringing in people from Central Asia, the ancient Persian background, and particularly these Turkic influences, and then of course the caliphates and the Arabic influence too. So they included not only Mesopotamia but Syria, Palestine as well. And when we talk about Palestine, of course, we're referring to the ancient name of Palestine. It wasn't a province or or at least even a state of any kind during this period, and very mixed ethnic grouping, Jews, Arabs, etc. So that was effectively a Sunni Muslim dynasty, and as I mentioned, obviously very really sympathetic to the Persian culture and adopted that. And so that became really a Persian tradition, even though they were Turkic peoples. And in particular during this time, they were the ones who were confronting the early three crusades that happened during this time. So all those famous major early crusades, the three of them were conducted against the Seljuqs. And so this was a critical period of West meets East, etc., and setting the scene for all the later conflicts too with the Byzantine Empire. So the Seljuq dynasty then bore the brunt of the Mongol invasions, and obviously the Mongol influence right across Central Asia into the Middle East and into Russia was enormous. So the vast territories that they conquered during that time, then breaking that up into khanates administered by various family members of the Mongol ruling families, the leading Genghis Khan leadership, and also the family successions that headed up those various provinces and break up administrative arrangements that happened under the Mongols. It was also characterized, of course, by a lot of destruction and widespread slaughter. I have to be very clear about that. For most of the peoples which they overran, it wasn't a very positive experience, to say the least. And so that also had an impact on demographics too. Some of these were quite genocidal, the activities that they conducted across the breadth of the empire that they established. But there was, as they settled down, actually, it kind of facilitated the cultural exchange between East and West, and really built up and, I guess, emphasised the Silk Road as that key link between East and West. And they were obviously quite neutral in terms of the cultures that they bumped, but very much able to adapt to local conditions, even though they were very brutal in their initial establishment of their regime. They were at least later on able to, imbibe or promote some aspects of the cultures that they appreciated. So they did, though, have a really big impact themselves on those societies, bringing with them their governance and trade and cultural practices as well. So quite a mix, a stew going on there. So you can see that process of the Mongol conquest and how far it reached, a massive spread right across from China, northern China, through to the Middle East and into the southern parts of what became Russia. So we're talking in particular in relation to the impact on Iran of Hulagu. He was one of these ruling families of the Mongol invasions, and he really took charge of the conquest of the area in which Iran occupied, and that was in the mid-1250s, and it really resulted too in the sack of Baghdad in 1258, very destructive siege and sacking that took place with a lot of slaughter that was associated with that as well. And so much of Syria was overrun. Persia and Mesopotamia were 3 campaigns against those Islamic states, and Genghis Khan and his warriors overran Central Asia, and a lot of Iran was devastated during this period, and particularly the region of Khorasan, where the inhabitants of Nishapur were slaughtered wholesale, and Merv, and they were 2 of the largest cities in the world at the time. So quite a brutal process of imperial expansion. So when I mentioned that they broke up their empire into khanates, the Ilkhanate was the area that was absorbing of what we would come to know as Iran geographical region, and they began a new era in Iran's history, and it was because it sits so centrally and crucially in that crossroads aspect of Central Asia and the Middle East and Europe. The Mongols really continued and maintained and promoted the importance of Iran in that context. And there was obviously a lot of cultural flourishing still happening as associated with that, and as the Mongols came to appreciate the skills and the quality of the culture that existed there already. And so they were quite happy to see that continue and promoted as it suited them. And there were advancements in art, science, and architecture through this period as well. So you can see here the breakup of how the Mongols administered their vast empire. And you can see the Ilkhanate sort of really absorbed quite a lot of the areas to either side of what we would call Iran today. Vast region indeed. So that then leads us into the succeeding empire of the Safavids. Now, the Safavids were, we believe, from a Kurdish background, although they spoke Turkish. And so, sometimes it was believed they might have been from Turkic origin, but it seems they were from the Kurdish areas that were to become actually absorbed by the Ottoman Empire eventually. And it was founded in the 16th century, and that was a really critical turning point in Iranian history for all sorts of reasons. And it played a very crucial role in creating a unified entity of Iran. You have a lot of loose ethnic groups, and quite a dynamic sort of religious situation going on. And this is a period where a lot of that comes into a bit more consolidation after a lot of fragmentation that happened between the Mongol period and the Safavid dynasty. And so you start setting the stage for the cultural and religious identity of Iran that we would find today. And that Safavid Empire managed to also struggle against the competing empires, the Mughal Empire of the subcontinent and beyond, managed to capture land from them and contest lands of the Kurdish regions of the Ottoman Empire by this stage, and bracing the Persian Gulf in the sort of the upper reaches of it. So a lot of battles fought, a lot of contested areas, and the Safavids really also, apart from the Mughals and the Ottomans, were engaged in conflict against the remaining khanates of the Mongol Empire to the north of the region. So it's the dynastic family that ruled from between 1501 to 1736. Again, you see even further advancements in architecture in Iran. But most importantly, this was the period that the so-called Twelver Shiism sect was basically permeated right across the length and breadth of Iran, and was a major unifying factor in creating, I guess, a national identity in that sense as well. And so it's quite interesting how this Safavid regime basically evolved, because it started out as being really focused on that religious theme, and then moved into a very military and aggressive imperial type of regime, and became one of what was known as the gunpowder regimes. And so they started out as a Sufi order, but they started to evolve too. And so this is the characteristics of the Shia branch of Islam that they were able to promote. And it's really now, these days, about 85% of all Shias have been influenced or fall under basically this designation of Twelver Shiism. And what's that about? Well, basically the theory, to sum it up in short, was about the authority of 12 imams, starting with Ali ibn Abu Talib and concluding with Muhammad ibn al-Hassan, who it is believed is going to be the Mahdi. It's sort of one of those kind of messianic traditions, who's going to return and bring peace and justice to the world. And it's kind of like an occultation thing. It's basically the Mahdi is hidden at the moment, but will be revealed. And that will be in the form of this Muhammad ibn al-Hassan Imam. So there are 5 really fundamental foundational principles, the usul ad-din, to this 12 Shiism beliefs, and settle on really the cores of their faith, core pillars of their faith. And they're really, this sect, this branch of Shiism is found predominantly in Iran, of course, but Azerbaijan, large parts of Iraq, about close to 60% of the population of Iraq are 12 Shiites, and Lebanon and Bahrain. But you will find, elements of them right throughout the region, and we'll look at how that works out when we look at the later periods of the modern times, and how that looks across the Middle East. You had some really prominent heads of the empire during this period, and Shahs, and Shah Abbas I was really quite a golden age, a lot of economic prosperity in particular, and really the trade multiplied and was a foundation for that wealth and that economic growth. And that, of course, helps to finance and support all of the military campaigns and successes that they experienced, and they expanded and secured the empire's borders during that time. And again, you continue to see cultural flourishing, also including in painting and poetry, as well as the traditional Persian excellence in many of the artistic endeavours. And, the architecture during this period was quite spectacular, and really a lot of what you'll see portrayed many times in documentaries or in films in the background. This is the period where you see the artistic heritage in the architecture really excelling with the ceramics, really spectacular, beautiful works of art. And so this identity really starts to consolidate during this period of what will become Iran as a nationalistic, national culture, and one that sort of starts getting more defined borders. Then we roll into the Qajar dynasty. There were a lot of dynamics going on at the time during this period in the 18th century. A lot of pressures externally, a lot of political instability, which set the stage for the Qajar dynasty, and they were able to bring some stability to Iran after periods of turbulence and internal conflict. But the foreign encroachment that you started to see during this time really started to also build this national understanding, national impression of foreign interests always being a threat to Iran, which will only be built on as time goes by. But the power struggles and the complex internal dynamics against foreign threats would continually press against Qajar rule and make it always under this kind of cloud hanging over it. And so, this is something that's going to be a pretty common theme as we go forward from here. So Muhammad Khan founded the dynasty, and you can see it in the 18th century all the way through to 1925. This Qajar rule lasted, so we really are coming into our modern times with this dynasty. So he was from the Kuyunlu clan of the Turkoman Qajar tribe. So you're still seeing that Turkoman influence through Iran, that real mix of Persian Turkoman influence as being the predominant ethnic background to the population. And its period of rule ended in 1925, when you now have a constituent assembly operating in Iran through reforms that happened during the Qajar rule under a lot of pressure to have a constitutional monarchy in effect. And so the Majlis was the first experiment at, I guess, a nascent type of democracy in Iran. And they, very unhappy with the state of things at that time and these foreign pressures that were going on, and wanted the ability to assert Iran in the face of that. And so what you saw was the declaration of Reza Shah as the successor, the new regime, and he'd been a former brigadier general of the Persian Cossack Brigade. And so this is the beginning of the Pahlavi dynasty in Iran, which would carry through until the Iranian Revolution. Unfortunately, you've got this seed of a democracy there with the Majlis, but it did not ultimately result in a democratic government, and it was never truly a democracy, even while the Majlis was operating in its own right, because of the authority that still held by the rulers of Iran through this period. During that time, of course, you see in the Qajar period the stuff that led to the Majlis turning over the regime. There was a lot of modernization, so there was a lot of positive things going on, but there was also a lot of heavy-handed repression and a lot of social discontent. And I think there's a confluence of pressures there growing on the population in relation to both, their fears and concerns about foreign interference, but also the issues around the rights, the human rights, and the political rights of the population, giving birth to these reform movements that were reflecting that dynamic. And then, in the later period here of the 19th century, in particular in 1891, a very significant event occurs with the tobacco protest. Now, that happened at the end of the 19th century, as I mentioned, in 1891, but it was the critical factor here was the element of the Shia clergy involvement, the ulama, and they really built their influence on Iranian society from this period in particular, or they'd been a rising factor, but this incident of the tobacco protest really brought them to the fore. And they showed themselves then to be a powerful political force. And it was in opposition to the monarchy's introduction of an arrangement which was really put into effect in 1890 by Nasir al-Din Shah, granting a concession to a British major, G.F. Talbot, for a full monopoly over the production, sale and export of tobacco for a 50-year period. Reminds me a little bit of the contract we entered into with China and the Port of Darwin. So this Persian tobacco industry that had existed and was existing at that time when this deal was done by Nasir al-Din Shah employed over 200,000 Iranians. So the concession represented a major blow to Persian farmers and bazaris, really. So handing this off to a foreigner and the impact that that was having on a significant part of the economy and the cultural, I guess, essence of Iran at the time was incredibly offensive, and it led to the clergy getting involved in this and helping to lead the protest charge. So there were a lot of boycotts, and the protests were extensive, and this ended up resulting in the Grand Ayatollah Mirza Hassan Shirazi's fatwa. So Mirza Hassan Shazari issues this judicial decree, which is known as fatwas. You may have heard that expression, and against what had happened with this tobacco arrangement. And within 2 years, Nasir al-Din Shah found himself powerless to stop the popular movement and ended up cancelling the concession. So this is a significant moment in Iran. You start seeing then, off the back of this, the continuing foreign inventions of a grander scale, though, and a lot of conflicts on their border areas, a lot of chewing away at the edges of the regime, and foreign powers starting to really try to build their influence. And then, of course, matched against that, the rise of nationalism, the rise of nationalist movements within Iran, looking to maintain independence and sovereignty in the face of this. And this map was just very busy, I know, but it shows you all of the areas on the edges of Iran that were under contest or forced treaties of concession and pushing back in some cases. For example, around Baluchistan, managed to push back and actually acquire territory. But many places where there were sort of nibbles and bites of territory, particularly in relation to Russian interests around Azerbaijan and the Merv area, and forced treaty concessions being made there. So none of that went down well with the population in sort of tandem with this rise of nationalism. So now let's talk about the Pahlavi dynasty, from Reza Shah to Muhammad Reza Shah. This was a period where there was a belief that Iran needed to modernize, need to learn a lot of lessons from the West, and this would then kind of really be the beginning of a massive internal tension of that desire to reform and match the West, but also maintain the essential cultural characteristics of Iran in the face of that, and particularly the religious aspects of it. So, we saw a lot of great infrastructure development, a lot of modernization in that respect, a lot of educational reforms, the expansion of literacy, and it was really a secular-based education system. And then this fed into the ambitions and the intentions of Reza Shah's modernization program, which is to actually promote secularism. And I guess that flew in the face of what had been this increasing authority of the imams and the clergy in Iran. So then, we come through to the period of the Second World War, and this is a major development that really built the foundation for what was then to occur in terms of the really strong belief that Iran was being pushed around and needed to assert itself on the world stage, and that Western and European forces in particular were to be greatly suspected and to be fought against. And this took place in the context of the Anglo-Soviet invasion in 1941 that swept the country, obviously in the interests of both Britain and the Soviet Union in their contest against Nazi Germany, who were always looking for opportunities to foment weaknesses and flank erosion of Britain's position, particularly in the Middle East. Britain was occupying Iraq and the Palestine Mandate area, etc., and the French as well, possessions. So this was, and the French possessions also became part of the Vichy territories, which were fought over during World War II as well. In fact, Australians involved in that campaign. But this invasion had a very significant effect on Iran. So you then had a period when you start to see that getting reflected in a political structure in Iran that's a little more perhaps what we would recognize as a more secular government, but with a very cultural reflection of Iran and their pushback from the nationalist inspirations, motivations, and tendencies that occurred through all that foreign pressure. And that was reflected in the nationalisation of their oil industry. Obviously, oil in the Middle East starts to become at this point a really sort of central feature of people's focus on their national wealth and sovereignty, and how they get an elevated position in the world and improve their personal standings and their livelihoods, their lifestyles. And so the influence of foreign powers in relation to that oil industry, with Britain and the US and others externally controlling oil exploration and managing oil industries, was seen as a threat to that sovereignty and maintaining maximum amount of wealth for your population. So you see the rise of a government in Iran that seeks to nationalise the oil industry, which then promotes concern amongst the Western world, particularly the US and UK, who've got economic interests involved in this. Plus, it's in the context of the Cold War contest with the Soviet Union, and they see this tendency for nationalisation reflecting the influence of the Soviet Union. So that then leads to a coup happening in 1953 against Prime Minister Mossadegh, who Mohammad Mossadegh was the person who initiated this process of nationalisation. And it has been conceded in recent times. In 2013, the CIA admitted that they'd been involved in this coup. It was Operation Ajax, was a designation. They released a lot of documentation associated with this period to clear out the skeletons in the closet, so to speak. And so this is probably one of the most central moments of them all. The fact that there was US and British intelligence involvement in this coup that led to a really significant shift in the political landscape, and public sentiment really acquired a deep vein of suspicion of the West as a result of this. And so you then see the Pahlavi regime really consolidating more autocratic personal power in this period, and obviously trying to build support for that kind of pro-Western leaning approach, which was the objective the UK and the US wanted to see, meant that the Shah was trying to really accelerate secularization, modernization, Western-style education, etc., and attitudes. And he really pursued that aggressively, at the same time trying to see more, economic development and the growth of the living standards of Iranians. But it also was accompanied by very heavy-handed political repression, and the Iranian intelligence agency, Seljuq, became notorious for the way that it dealt with political opposition, political repression, and dissent, and how it managed social unrest. So the brutality of the Seljuq intelligence regime really fed into what was starting to build up as a real dynamic towards the revolution. And particularly at this point, you see the modernization starts to threaten the Iranians' belief in their own strength of their culture and their cultural values, and they believe a lot of what the aspects of Western culture don't really fit with the Iranian culture. It's quite a prominent attitude, particularly in areas outside the cities, etc. And so this is where we move into this revolutionary period. The opposition to the Shah's regime really starts to escalate. You see a lot of groups organising during this time. At this period, you had the Iranian trade unions in existence and helping to organise some of this. And that political campaign and unrest would focus a lot on the role of the clergy in Iran as being a pillar of that Iranian cultural heritage and the values of modern culture that had been associated with the religion of Shiism and the Twelver Shiism, and its strength and leadership in that world. And so they particularly focused on the Grand Ayatollah, who was in exile in France at this time, Ayatollah Khomeini. And so he became a bit of a focus for the unrest and a focus for the protest movements. So this really starts to boil over in the 1970s. And, it's funny that the labour unions were really a big part of this, because they would actually lose their freedom such as they had at this stage later on after the revolution. But this all resulted in the protests and strikes that created the situation where you could overthrow the Shah in 1979 as the pivotal moment in Iranian history. So we're going to really explore the consequences of that revolution, and then look at how Iran evolved from that point onwards, and what were the security implications for the region and the world. But just to sum up, I guess, this historical journey we've been on with Iran and trying to understand that heritage and the dynamics. If we go right back to the start, you see a fantastic, rich mix of cultural heritage and in the arts and in architecture, in philosophy, in medicine and science, and that really interesting Persian dynamic that continued to maintain its thread all through Iranian history, which is really an incredible tribute to Cyrus the Great, who got that ball rolling, and the Achaemenids, and also such a really rich mix of ethnicities in Iran that has been a thread through its history, was actually valued so greatly by Cyrus the Great, and really his example of the value of cultural diversity, not just within what became the borders of Iran, but also the appreciation of the value of that diversity in the areas that Cyrus brought under his empire at the time. And that relationship was, a really positive one in many ways for its time. But a lot of lessons to be learned about that. If I guess the Iranians want to, learn from their history and achieve the sort of moral authority and greatness that that they would aspire to, then they could certainly go back and learn a lot of lessons from Cyrus the Great, and understand the history at the time, and particularly, ironically, Cyrus the Great's role in establishing or supporting the return of the exiled Jews to rebuild their home in Jerusalem and Judea, Samaria, and the lands of the Israeli people. So then we see this dynamic of Iran's position in the Islamic spectrum, and in the what's become effectively the contest for the soul of Islam, and a lot of the seeds for the conflict that would emerge in the region associated with that contest. Really, you get that confluence now of the rise of the religious leadership, the Ayatollahs, and the ulama moving into now the political dominance of Iran. So this is the really critical period that sets the scene for the discussions we'll subsequently have. So thanks for being with me for this journey through history. We'll have some conversations with people who are very authoritative on the subject matter of Iran, its influence, and what to do about it. And so I look forward to having you with me then, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.